today is a special day for me and my wife to be honored by the Episcopal Peace Fellowship with an award that is given every 3 years at convention. But this year, convention was put off a year, and then when it finally came about in July, they said no to extra activities, and they came to see me and said, let's do it in later on in December, whenever you come up with a date. So here we are this afternoon, and I see it as a time of reflection because I started my ministry here at Grace Memorial. I started my ministry here in 1967 as a city missioner for the Diocese of Oregon 4 days a week. And 2 days a week I was here with a youth group and Sunday school and anything else that came along. And so Dwayne Alvord was the rector. Some of you may remember Dwayne. He was the rector at the time that I came here. And right after I was ordained to the priesthood in 1968, Dwayne said to me, he said, you need to do a wedding. Oh, I've never done a wedding. We'll give you one. So he set me up with somebody that I'm glad I can't remember. I'm glad they can't remember. And I went through all of what I thought I needed to in preparing. And the day of the wedding came. And the organist that we had here at the Grace Memorial called in sick. She couldn't be here after all the planning. And so she'd gotten somebody that would play the organ, and I didn't know who it was. I didn't know what was happening. But you need to know that back then, things were different. When I was ordained and when I served here, that was the altar. And the priest's back was to the people all the time, every service. The pipes were not there because the organ was over here, and it was a small organ. And the choir faced each other on both sides, and people came to the rail for communion. And so that was the way it was. As you can see, things have changed, much for the better, I might say. But I know it took time for all of that to occur. So my first wedding, I came out over there, the door with the men, and they came out, and we stood there in front of the altar, waiting as to what is next. Total silence. Total silence. And I thought to myself, somebody must be supposed to do something. And I suppose it's me. There was no music. There was no music. And so I pulled out my prayer book and I began the service. Dearly beloved, we are gathered together here in the sight of God and in the face of this company to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Where was the woman? She was at the back waving with all of the women that were with her and her mother and all. And they were waving frantically. And luckily, I'd had 4 years of radio experience when I was in college working in radio. So I had the ability to somehow read ahead to see what I was going to say. So I knew I had to do something. So anyhow, I kept on going, didn't skip a beat, to join together this man and this woman, which is an honorable estate, instituted of God, signifying unto us the mystical union that's between Christ and his church, which holy estate Christ adorned and beautified with his presence, and first miracle that he wrought in Cana of Galilee, and is commended by St. Paul to be honorable among all men, and therefore is not to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly, but reverently, discreetly, advisedly, soberly, and in the fear of God. Arms waving at the back. I wanted to wave at them and wave back, but instead I turned to the organist and I bowed. I hope she got the signal. She did. She started playing the wedding march, and in flow the women, just beautifully down the aisle, all the way up to the front. And that was it. I continued the service with great self-satisfaction with these words, into this holy estate, these two persons presently come now to be joined. If any have a cause, just cause, why not be lawfully joined? Let them speak. So that's a reflection on my beginnings here at Grace Memorial. Rather embarrassing, but it all seemed to have worked out. Some reflections of who I am. I'm a child of the desert in West Texas. I was raised on the desert. And one of the things that I had as a hobby growing up in high school was to go out and capture rattlesnakes. I'm sure some of you have done that in the past, if not all of you. It was not easy. You had a long stick, broomstick or whatever, and added to it with a noose at the end, and you'd hold it out and get it around the neck of a snake and pull it to and cut off its head and put the skin on a board and salt it down, and I made hat bands out of it. So I was famous for my hat bands. But part of my desert experience was in the Big Bend of Texas, where that large national park sits with the Rio Grande River. It's a beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous place. I spent a lot of time there. And I've got a story I always like to tell of waking up in the middle of the night and finding out that I had a rattlesnake on top of my chest. And people stopped and thought about it for a moment and then said, well, what did you do? And I said, well, there wasn't anything I could do, so I went back to sleep. And if you believe that, you believe a lot of things. But anyhow, it was also a place you'd have to shake out your boots every morning to see you didn't have a scorpion in them, trying to stay warm. I was raised in the Baptist church, but my parents started going to the Episcopal church when I was 14. And I started stopping and going with them. And I'll have to admit I was captured by the prayer book. Literally captured by the sense of history, the majesty of the prayer book. And it made me want to learn more about church history. And in the Baptist church, all we heard about was the Bible in such a way that I, had heard it several times or whatever from the preacher. And I started really becoming involved with the Episcopal Church when I was 14. I was the youth group. I was the only young person in the church. And so I was the youth group. The church there had been built in 1883. I may have told you this story, but it was built, Pecos was my hometown, and it was built during the time the railroad was being put together. And so it was the end of the tracks, and the town grew up. And before long, they had 20 or 25 saloons in town, and people were making it a place to live, and there were no churches. And so the saloon keepers decided to take up an offering and come up with money for a church. Good idea. Wonderful. They came up with $500. No one would accept it because it was tainted money coming out of the saloons, except the Episcopal Church. So that was the church that I was in. It would only hold about 30 people. And it was, it's still in existence. It's been moved to Fort Stockton, Texas now. But that was my beginnings in the Episcopal Church. I was raised in a white racist environment, and I don't really think I knew it at the time because I didn't know that much about what was going on in our society. But if you've seen the film Till, Emmett Till had just happened. And so we were all concerned about what was taking place in our society, especially the South. And I found that the motivator for the love of God was justice. Somehow justice had to play out within my environment. So in 1956, I helped our high school in Pecos, Texas become integrated. I've told you that story, so you don't need to hear it again. But in 1960, the dean of students called me into his office. I thought I was really in trouble. And he asked me to take the leadership of I was a campus leader at that time, the leadership on what was getting ready to happen at Texas Tech in Lubbock. And that was to integrate the school with 5 students. And there was so much of a problem in many southern universities, they didn't want a problem. So we scheduled ourselves as the leadership team throughout the campus. And whenever there became an issue that would rise, we would try to figure out what to do and put it down and keep going. And we had no incidents or of any consequence on the campus. So we integrated Texas Tech in 1960. My senior year in college, I went to see my bishop in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was the bishop of New Mexico and Southwest Texas, which includes 800 miles of the Rio Grande. It's got a new name today, the Diocese of the Rio Grande, I think it's called. Anyhow, that was my diocese. I felt at the time like I was a voice crying in the wilderness. The story of John the Baptist in the Bible still resonates with me in trying to articulate a message that is often unpopular, as we hear the message today in the gospel. I told the bishop I was ready to go to seminary. He said, "Oh, you're not." I had an ROTC commission coming. He said, "You take that and come back and see me later." And so I spent 2.5 years in the Army and left for the Church Divinity School of the Pacific with my wife Elaine 2.5 years after the Army, or after when I was in the Army. We lived in Berkeley, California for 3 years. And believe me, it was an opening for a desert Texas boy. Wow, we learned a lot. We look back on that time and wonder still. It was at CDSP in 1964 that I first heard the story of the Palestinians and Palestinian Christians, how their land had been colonized, confiscated, taken from them by what became the state of Israel. We all know the Jewish narrative, but very few have heard about the Palestinian narrative. Naimatik was a Palestinian Christian from the Galilee region, and I've known him since then. He was from a village that had been taken over. He was 8 years old. It had been taken over by the Zionists in 1948. 6,000 people were removed. All of those who were the Muslims were moved across the river, taken in trucks, dumped out literally in Jordan. They had 4 hours to move out of town. The Christians, there were four different Christian bodies, though, including an Anglican body, small. They were taken and let out just outside of Nazareth, where they were taken in by the churches there, put in basements, and that's where he grew up. So that was part of what happened with him when he was growing up. Naim kept telling me to come and see. And I didn't until 1983, with 16 parishioners from St. Mark's Cathedral in Seattle. And I've never been the same since, with the conversations I entered into and the people that I talked to and knew. I've never been the same. And so in 1991, I was elected to be a deputy to the Episcopal National Convention from the Diocese of Oregon. I'd moved from Seattle to Portland. And I worked with a group in Seattle to put a resolution concerning the occupation and the settlements that were springing up. The resolution covered many issues, including 50,000 settlers that were confiscating Palestinian land in the West Bank. And in the resolution that we put together, and that we presented at the General Convention, it requested that the billions of dollars given to the state of Israel by the U.S. government be used to pay for the resettlement of the settlers back to the state of Israel, out of the West Bank. This was in 1991. Now, in 2022, there are over 600,000 settlers living on confiscated land in the West Bank, and we've increased our offering billions of dollars that go for those settlements because we don't put strings on them with the government in Israel. As a part of this story, Bethlehem has 22 settlements that surround it, all on Palestinian confiscated land. 87% of what I knew of Bethlehem in 1983, 87% has been confiscated by the state of Israel. So, oh, little town of Bethlehem is becoming smaller. I've been over to the region more than 30 times at St. George's School, taken various church groups, 9 international conferences, and many other conferences. I became chair of the Friends of Sabeel North America in July 2001 at the request of retired presiding Bishop Ed Browning. We had no money in the bank with no idea of how to proceed. And we all know what happened 6 weeks later with 9/11. We were able to host a Sabeel conference in Boston, Massachusetts with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. 500 people attended, and he became the patron of Friends of Sabeel North America as well as Sabeel International in order to help us end apartheid in Israel and Palestine, to end the illegal occupation, and to give Palestinians their full rights as a people. And so this product of the desert in West Texas entered into the justice issues of Palestinians and Israelis. Friends of Sabeel hosted 34 conferences throughout the United States from 2001 to 2011. We had them in 23 states with over 10,000 people attending. A Catholic nun by the name of Elaine Kelly was our only paid staff, and she did a magnificent job supporting the conferences, making them happen. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all participated, and each was held at a church. Very few were at universities. All of them were ecumenical. All of them were concerned about justice and international issues and international law. We changed the conversation that was going on at that time. And as time goes by, we are still watching a difference is being made on raising justice issues. More international support is being given to the Palestinian cause. Last week, Dan spoke to us of his background in a part of the church that embraces Armageddon and the end times. And as he mentioned, it's something that grew out of the 19th century and is totally beyond us as a part of what we would want to believe. This part of Christianity is very strong in the South. It is very supportive of the state of Israel. Why? Because it is their belief that the end of the world is near, and Jesus will return after the Jews return to Jerusalem. And when the end times come with Jesus and the Jews that do not convert to Christianity, they're scheduled to go to hell. How anti-Semitic can he be? But the state of Israel gets billions of dollars from churches, sending them to settlers, and our government allows them to take tax advantages of those gifts that when we give it. And I've been in churches in Chicago and other places that have the American flag on one side of the altar and the Israeli flag on the other side of the altar. Nationalism, especially Christian nationalism, is a very difficult problem for the future of Christianity. Every year there's an organized group of these end-time Christian believers to march in the streets of Jerusalem by the thousands. And they come over to hasten the end of time through supporting wars with neighboring countries that surround the state of Israel. Especially during the war of Iraq. They just loved that war. They really wanted it. I met with one of these Christians supporting Israel at that time. And I asked her if she'd met any of these Palestinian Christians, especially those that I'd gotten to know. Her response, they're not real Christians. Oh, really? Meaning, of course, they are not Western Christians. I did remind her that Pentecost was a biblical story, and some of the Palestinian Christians claim a heritage back to Pentecost, their families. I stopped the conversation knowing there was no way to talk together. Justice is love in action. That is what the Episcopal Peace Fellowship is all about. I found the Episcopal Peace Fellowship to be a very good program on issues of war and peace, women's rights, LGBTQ concerns, Native American rights, Palestinian concerns, and issues of people of color, and on and on and on, wherever justice needs to be highlighted by individuals or communities. I've been nurtured by God and God's church all of these years, having been ordained a deacon in 1967, a priest in 1968. I've been nurtured by God. I know that a difference can be made with justice work and its effect upon the larger world. I'm a product of Isaiah 6. Whom shall I send? And I said, here am I, send me. And he said, go. I was 16 years old when I knew I had a mission in life and not knowing what it would be. And so here I am, growing older, hopefully wiser, and glad to be with this church. I was ordained a priest in 1968, and the journey of life is really an exciting and meaningful journey, especially with the one who has created all we know and do not know. Justice is not a priority for many people. Christians especially need to know the truth that seeking justice is love in action, and that the truth will set us free. The Episcopal Peace Fellowship helps us to know the truth as revealed by Jesus. Amen.